Today, we're cracking open a 15-year case file on the Iowa child welfare system. And this isn't just a summary. Think of it as a forensic, evidence-based investigation. We're going to look at 3 full cycles of federal reviews to uncover a system that seems to be caught in a repeating pattern of failure. Let's get into the evidence. So here's how we're going to break this down. We'll examine 5 key exhibits. First, we'll analyze each of the 3 review cycles, one by one. Then we'll connect the dots and look at the patterns across all 3. And finally, we'll deliver our verdict on the true state of the system. Our investigation kicks off back in 2003 with a system that can really only be described by one phrase: institutional resignation. This is the story of a state that wasn't just failing, it had seemingly resigned itself to that failure, pointing the finger at forces it claimed were beyond its control. The numbers from this first round, they're just staggering. A 90% failure rate in monthly caseworker visits. Let that sink in. That means the vast majority of children weren't getting the most basic safety check. You had caseloads that were just catastrophically high, and, incredibly, a third of all child deaths were misreported. But the state's official story was simple. Our performance was stunted by budget cuts. Now, this is where the evidence change completely breaks down. The state sets the narrative. It's all about resource depletion. Federal oversight, instead of challenging that, just accepts it, and they base their entire statewide assessment on a tiny review of just 50 cases. So the reform plan that comes out of it, it's a total fantasy, promising big culture changes while completely ignoring the impossible reality on the ground. This quote right here, this is Exhibit A in the state's defense. By framing the problem as one of budget cuts, they shift all accountability away from their own management and onto outside factors. The message is pretty clear. We didn't fail, we were failed. And then there's this statement, which reveals the core contradiction of the whole exercise. The system correctly identifies that impossibly high caseloads are a central reason for the failures. And yet, the official improvement plan explicitly says they won't hire more caseworkers. This isn't a reform plan. It's a document that basically locks in the crisis for years to come. So, our forensic rating for round 1 is pretty clear-cut. System integrity is low. They couldn't even count child deaths correctly. Oversight strength is weak, based on that totally inadequate sample size. And the likelihood of real reform? Yeah, that was low right from the very start. All right, let's jump forward to 2010. 7 years have passed, and the system has moved from resignation to what looks like a full-blown institutional collapse. The new narrative isn't about recovery. It's about trying to manage a complete and total breakdown. In round 2, Iowa failed every single one of the 7 primary outcomes. But the biggest bombshell was the data itself. Federal auditors took one look at the state's self-reported quality assurance numbers and declared them invalid. At the very same time, the state incentivized 638 staff members to retire, kicking off what they called a capacity collapse. The evidence chain here is almost surreal. The state submits flawed data. The federal review spots it and calls it invalid, but then, incredibly, praises the agency's strong leadership. In response, the reform plan pivots away from the mission of protecting kids and focuses instead on a bureaucratic project, just rebuilding the data system from the ground up. This is such a critical contradiction. You have federal documents praising the department's leadership, while the very same documents show that actual child safety had gotten demonstrably worse since the last review. This kind of contradiction exposes an oversight process that seems to value professional courtesy over forensic accountability. This admission is just chilling. In child welfare, lost information about a child's safety isn't some clerical error. It's a black hole where a vulnerable child can just disappear. This points to a systemic breakdown in the most basic, safety-critical functions of the entire agency. So our verdict for round 2 is a system in a nosedive. Integrity is low. The agency couldn't even produce valid data. Oversight is weak, praising leadership in the middle of a total failure. And reform likelihood stays low because the focus shifted from kids to spreadsheets. We now arrive at our final round, which starts in 2018. The theme here is no longer crisis. It's something else: managed decline. Failure has been normalized, it's accepted, and now it's just a condition to be administered. By round 3, the state is failing on all 7 outcomes. That's a 100% failure rate. But instead of sounding the alarm, the system rebrands this disaster as an opportunity for improvement. Even more alarming, the state responded to its crisis by deliberately blinding itself, cutting its own internal case review sample in half because proper oversight was now considered unsustainable. At this stage, the evidence chain has completely decayed. The state openly admits it can't even sustain proper quality assurance. In response, federal oversight basically suspends the national standards and acts more like a technical consultant than a regulator. The reform plan introduces some new tools, but it completely sidesteps the impossible workload that has plagued this system from day one. This quote is basically the official notice of surrender. When a system declares that simply knowing how well it's performing is unsustainable, it has chosen administrative convenience over its fundamental duty to ensure child safety. It's a shocking admission. And this quote demonstrates the profound weakness of the oversight process. The federal report documents a really dangerous practice, housing abused children with juvenile offenders, and then explicitly states this finding had no impact on their final decision. That's a documented risk with zero consequences. So our final round rating shows a system in a state of controlled failure. Integrity is low, oversight is weak, and the likelihood of true reform is, at best, moderate. Because while they're addressing some administrative issues, the core problem, that impossible workload, remains completely untouched. Okay, so now let's step back and connect all the dots. We've examined the evidence from each round individually. Now it's time to map the undeniable, repeating patterns that emerge over 15 years of failure. What's really stunning here is not just that the system failed, but that it failed in the exact same ways, over and over again. The caseload crisis they identified in 2003 is still the central problem in 2018. The lack of a quality assurance system in 2003 evolves into a broken one in 2010, and then a deliberately dismantled one by 2018. This isn't progress, it's stagnation, and in some cases, regression. This comparison really says it all. In 2003, the problem was not having a QA system. 15 years later, the problem is that the system they finally built is apparently too burdensome to even maintain. The system's capacity just to measure itself has actually degraded over time. Based on the full 15-year case file, all the evidence we've walked through, it is now time to deliver our final forensic verdict on the Iowa child welfare system. Our investigation leads to one inescapable conclusion. The system's true condition is one of controlled failure, where checking boxes has replaced the actual mission of ensuring child safety. Federal oversight isn't functioning as an enforcer, it's acting more like a partner in managing this failure. And those reform plans, they consistently produce paperwork, not meaningful change. So the institutional trajectory isn't one of improvement, but of stagnation, and in key areas, regression. This is a system trapped in a loop, which leaves us with a final, provocative question. What does it take to break a system out of a cycle of its own making?